What's going on, guys? We're out here at South Mountain taking a look at the all-new Norco Optic and Sight for 2024. In this video, I'll run through the differences of each bike, go through their strengths and weaknesses, and give you guys a bottom line for each, and then decide which one I'm going to keep for a long-term review. Taking a look at these bikes, the most obvious change is the use of an idler and high main pivot, an especially interesting choice for a bike like the Optic. Travel numbers stay the same. The Optic sticks with 125 millimeters of rear wheel travel paired to a 140 mm fork, and the Sight still makes 150 millimeters of rear wheel travel with a 160 mm fork. Both bikes now support coil and air shock compatibility thanks to the revised kinematics and increase in mid-stroke support. The Sight and Optic both utilize interchangeable upper rocker links and lower shock mounts. This allows either bike to be set up with mixed wheels or in a full 29-inch configuration. As one of the early adopters of size-specific geometry, Norco does a great job going into every fine detail when it comes to their sizing. My test bikes were size 5 frames, or the equivalent of an XL, so geometry angles may vary across smaller sizes. The Optic sees a jump from a 65-degree head tube angle all the way to 63 degrees, while the Sight stays at 64. The seat tube angle on the Optic gets a 1.5 degrees steeper at 77.5 degrees, while the Sight remains at its original 78 degrees for nice upright pedaling positions on both bikes. Rear center lengths measure 431 millimeters on the Optic and 438 on the Sight, but now have a bit of growth at sag for longer effective rear center lengths on both bikes. Both bikes have pretty sizable wheelbases with nice tall head tubes, and body position felt comfortable straight away. The coolest part about the interchangeable links is that the leverage ratio and geometry stay consistent when switching between wheel sizes. Where one setup might offer better suspension performance or more preferable geometry on other bikes, Norco emphasized not sacrificing any one factor for another. This allows wheel configurations to remain purely preference rather than changing multiple factors at one time. And rightfully so, because Norco went through extensive prototyping to achieve these traits. The philosophy behind their idler placement was to improve pedaling performance without negatively impacting descending performance. By eliminating most of the anti-squat from the kinematics, they could then independently tune it back in using chain tension under load while pedaling. While the anticipated benefit of my feet feeling glued to the pedals was present on these bikes, the glued to the ground feeling associated with other high pivot bikes was not. The idler eliminates most of the pedal kickback. Norco actually kept a desired amount present to help the bikes get up to speed more easily when pumping and jumping. On the Optic, the feedback through the pedals is more prevalent but translates into a bike that feels light, pops easily off of side hits, and is rewarding of rider input. The bike is enjoyable for holding it wide open across mellow terrain, but is just as comfortable tackling aggressive descents more thoughtfully, thanks to great front wheel traction and excellent square edge bump absorption. I think it's great they maintain the qualities that make a short travel bike great by maintaining a high level of support throughout the travel while also increasing the capability of the bike. As for the Sight on trail, where the Optic started to reach its limit in the rough stuff, the Sight was just getting started. Downhill performance is the main standout characteristic, but with a priority on all-mountain performance. The suspension has a super light off the top feeling, but with enough consistent ramp to keep from blowing through the travel. It is not the most sprightly, light-footed bike I've ridden. The axle path is slightly more rearward than the Optic, and the longer travel really helps drive the bike forward across the roughest terrain, but the bike is definitely bigger and feels that way on trail. The highly active feeling out of the rear suspension also benefits the uphill performance and creates a bike that is surprisingly efficient to pedal as a result. A good amount of pedal bob is present on the Sight that I didn't notice on the Optic, but the byproduct is the same bump-deleting ride qualities that make it great at descending. The use of the idler became most apparent to me while shifting through the gear range on the Sight. Around the 3 largest cogs, the suspension becomes notably firmer and seemed to counteract any amount of pedal bob, supporting the suspension through larger dips and allowing for a more consistent cadence. This was great for the rough terrain in Phoenix, and the additional rear wheel traction was appreciated when navigating ledgy terrain under heavy load. As for strengths of the Optic rewards rider input and maintains the snappy and playful handling a 125 mm bike should have. This keeps a wider variety of terrain more interesting, and I think is perfect if you enjoy riding at a high speed on terrain that has more undulations and side hits to pump and jump off of. As for the Sight, bump deleting performance was the standout trait and dimensions that promote great traction at both wheels. If you prioritize hitting hot laps on the gnarlier stuff more regularly, the Sight is a great all-mountain bike that thrives on high speed well into the realm of the enduro bike category. Both of these bikes pedaled far better than I anticipated and required relatively minimal effort by providing excellent rear wheel traction and neutral pedaling positions. While the 63-degree head tube angle of the Optic really helps bring comfort and control closer to the limit of what that bike is capable of, there's no getting around that slacker head tubes create larger arcs from the front wheel that result in delayed handling. This was awesome for 90% of the trails I rode both bikes on, but it felt a little bit difficult to point the bikes through tight turns when things got exceptionally technical at lower speed. With the Sight, the difficulty navigating technical terrain was amplified from the longer wheelbase and more immediate growth in rear center. While the head tube is 1 degree steeper, the bike is still bigger, and I experienced a few instances where it felt like it was getting away from me when attempting to tighten up turns at a moment's notice. That being said, the intentions are clearly focused on increased confidence when holding it wide open, and that is exactly what both bikes have achieved. So what's the bottom line on the new Optic and Sight? While these are two different bikes, Norco has done a great job elevating the baseline for what both are capable of through their no-compromise approach to suspension, progression in geometry, and simplifying shock setup. They have successfully grown the use application of both bikes without eliminating what makes them great for trail and all-mountain use. With such dialed build kit options at a ton of different levels, all you have to do is decide which bike meets your needs best and go from there. As for me, I feel like the Sight is an incredible 150mm bike that breeds confidence. I found myself able to push on that bike with pretty minimal effort, and the response was an effortless ride experience so long as the dimensions of the bike weren't holding it back. On the Optic, the ride experience requires a bit more input, but the result is very rewarding. I think if I can get that bike set up a little more similar to the Sight, it would truly be the best of both worlds experience. For that reason, I'll be holding on to it for a long-term review to see what changes I can make to unlock a bit more of its performance, and maybe even compare it to some other similar bikes. To check out the full side-by-side comparison of the new Optic and Sight, visit the link in the description or visit vitalmtb.com.